Anjali Venkateshwaran, Senior Director of Marketing at Biomea, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kevin Schwartze, who will be joining me today. Kevin is the Manager of Behavior and Acclimatation at Biomea's site in Worcester, and he is focused on advancing our behavior, enrichment, and training programs. Prior to joining Biomea, Kevin worked as a research assistant, NHP colony manager, program development lead, behaviorist, and behavioral consultant at multiple biotech and contract research companies. He received his bachelor's degree from Rockhurst University and a doctoral degree from the University of Kansas Medical Center. Join Biomea is a CRO with locations in Worcester, Mass., Richmond, California, and multiple sites in China. Join Biomea's portfolio includes comprehensive discovery, ADME, and GLP toxicology services. You can learn more about Biomea's service offering at www.biomea.com. So, let's get into today's topic on primate behavior programs at Biomea. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Anjali. I appreciate the invitation, and thank you for the kind introduction. As you mentioned, I am the manager of our large animal behavior and acclimation groups here at Biomea. Our behavior group focuses on the well-being of these incredible animals and encourages them to live and express species-typical behaviors. Enrichment is one way that we encourage our animals to express themselves, and it goes much deeper than just providing toys, food, produce items, that kind of thing. A real thoughtful and effective enrichment program requires attention to each individual animal's needs and addresses those needs with a proactive and dynamic mindset. However, if the animals are exhibiting abnormal behaviors, despite comprehensive enrichment efforts, fast identification of the root cause and an appropriate response is paramount for us. The other group I currently manage is our acclimation team. The acclimation team is responsible for the bulk of the hands-on training received by most primates on our campus. We implement a thorough training protocol tailored for each animal to effectively communicate our training goals and prepare them for the amazing research they are contributing to.
That's amazing. I mean, it's when we were talking about this topic, animal enrichment is not something that you think about, right? You think, okay, I'm going to be doing a study. I need, X number of NHPs. I'm going to be dosing them and I'm going to be doing this. But, why do enrichment at all? And, how does it kind of impact the studies and the outcome? Because there's a lot of work that goes into building and executing an enrichment program, right?
Yeah, and it really comes down to running your study and getting the highest quality data that you can.
Okay.
Enrichment really contributes to making the monkeys the most monkey that they can be. And working with primates, that's really my specialty, particularly macaques. And, by having a comprehensive enrichment program, we're addressing not only, physical drivers, but also, psychological and social needs that the animals have.
Which is really true. When you think about it, right? Because we think physiological, right? Like I'm going to dose intrathecal or something, whatever.
Mhm.
But it's true because I mean, there's definitely when the animals are psychologically and mentally, okay, stimulated properly and they're psychologically healthy, that has direct link to physiology. Is that kind of the right way of thinking about it?
Oh, yeah, yes, absolutely. And, just from a physiological standpoint, especially if you are operating in a more sensitive uh, physiological space, such as, you're doing things that involve the immune system, if you are, such as like a transplant study, or if you're, testing vaccines, anything like that, any added stressors can really come in and potentially cloud your data.
Right, right, right. And this can even vary between animals in a cohort, right? Because like humans, primates, some primates are probably a little more, jumpier rather, a little more exhibit anxiety more than, it's another animal. So there's definitely animal to animal variation. Do you see that? Do you see a lot of differences within individual animals? And do you have to tailor the programs to the individual animal level?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. There's been a lot of really amazing work done by some big name primatologists. Just off the top of my head, we like John Capitanio, um, looking into each animal's specific temperament and how that really affects how they develop and what really helps them thrive in the
Right,
environment that they're in. And
right.
so, we are looking at really integrating some neat things to uh, assist our animals, get through the training that they need to perform the research that they're doing, but also
Mm.
do it in a way that eases those steps for them at an
Yeah.
individual level.
Right, right. And I know we're going to touch on the 3 Rs. That's a question that I'm going to, kick that down the road a little bit. But I'm just more curious, apart from individual animals, do you see any gender and age specific differences for enrichment? For example, are younger, like say like juvenile or sub adults more in need for enrichment compared to the to older animals, or is it all kind of the same?
All animals of all ages, sexes, need enrichment. And honestly, the number one best thing that we can do for the animals that are in our care is ensure that their social needs are being met.
Mm.
Particularly when it comes to establishing, co-house pairs or co-house trios. It's really one of the main focuses of my groups here at Biomere is, ensuring that we, if let's say an animal does lose its partner because of stuff happens on the research occasionally, or it's designed to happen that way. That we are taking proactive steps to have that animal's needs addressed as soon as
Yes.
possible.
And that's a really good point. And, that probably segues right into the 3 Rs. I mean, we're kind of, there's a huge commitment, right? And this is true for Biome, for other CROs, any, ethical, it's like an ethical concern to make sure that the 3 Rs are met. And um, from a 3 Rs perspective, right, I think animal enrichment is critical because the whole idea of managing animal use and being very thoughtful about the number of animals and things like that. So tell me a little bit more about how we're tying in the enrichment programs with the 3 Rs. I mean, some of it is obvious, but I think I just like to hear you kind of summarize it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who aren't familiar, the 3 R's of research are replacement, reduction, and refinement. Replacement involves appropriately substituting non-animal methods. That'd be like an artificial intelligence, computer model, testing in tissue culture, or other in vitro methods instead of using animal models. It could also include using lower phylogenetic animals such as Drosophila fruit flies instead of primates. The second R, reduction, that requires that we only use the minimum number of animals for the studies to be scientifically robust. That also includes potentially, being able to share a control group between similar studies that are happening at the same time. So that way
Right,
we don't have, two control groups going at the same time unnecessarily.
right.
And the third R is really where, my realm jumps in even more so, and that stands for refinement. And
Right.
this is what really addresses the animal's actual experience when they're in the scientific process and all aspects of their lives in the laboratory, from husbandry to enrichment to training to the scientific procedures that they undergo, should be persistently and critically evaluated to reduce unnecessary burdens that are placed on these animals. Not only is it our ethical duty to fulfill these R's, but it's also our legal obligation,
Yes, yes.
federal, international, and the scientific community at large demand diligent care and scientific rigor when working with
Yes.
research animals, and rightly so.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And you're absolutely right. Like 3 Rs is such an important concept. And it's awesome to see pharma, biotech, the whole community, academia, everybody embracing it and being very thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
However, balancing that is always the dollar, the money, right? And these studies are not cheap. as we know,
Yeah,
and the dollars can grow, the budget can get pretty big pretty quickly. And in
absolutely.
this era of cost consciousness and people are just watching their dollars a little bit carefully, kind of how do we kind of continue to um, explain to our listeners, to explain to the community that actually animal enrichment, primate enrichment programs are going to help you manage your budget and they are very important. So cutting corners on that is just it's just bad science, but actually has an economic impact as well down the road, a negative economic impact.
Yeah,
So what do you think
absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, and real appropriate behavioral management and training protocols, they're essential for us to produce highly accurate and quality data sets.
Yes.
And at a very base level, the animals must be trained for the research procedures and actual data collections, be that various blood collections, body weights, dosing routes, whatever the study dictates. But above that are where, superior animal enrichment programs really efficiently generate reliable data. And,
Mm.
one of my primary approaches to effectively manage our NHPs, but also service our clients is to, identify some natural primate behavior drives and really incorporate them into Biomere's basic operations. And, a lot of this research into, primates in general comes from really incredible primatologist researchers. I mentioned John Capitanio before, but also, some other ones who I know have really been influential for me would be Nancy Kane, Steve Shapiro, Melanie Graham, Linda Novak, just to name a few of them. And, I don't have enough time today to discuss all their amazing work, but I do have to shout out the American Society of Primatologists. I'm a very proud member. And, even though I'm not technically a primatologist, because I don't study primates, by reading their research, it
Mm.
really allows me to learn, you know, in depth about the creatures that I'm working with to really increase the level of care that they're getting, but then also increase efficiencies for our clients as well.
Yes. No, I agree. And maybe this is a bit of a segue, but I'll confess, I don't know much about primatology, and I'm not sure how many of our listeners do, but I mean, how are a lot of the primatology studies, are they done within a controlled lab environment or are they done in the wild, or is it a mixture? Can you give us a little, like, maybe a very, very high level introduction into kind of how primatology works? I know you could go into a ton of detail, but for, somebody who's not super familiar with the space, it might be good to get an understanding, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, primatology revolves typically in, I would say, three major worlds. The first would be like the conservation world. So that would be, studying primates in their natural habitats.
Hmm.
The second would be primates at the primate center, where you can at the national primate centers. For instance, the California National Primate Research Center or the Oregon National Primate Research
Mm.
Center. There's 7 national primate research centers around the country. And they house large numbers of animals. They have large breeding colonies. They can study group dynamics and a bunch of stuff like that. And then kind of the third group is the group that we more fall into, which is kind of the industry use almost of them.
Yeah.
Um,
The lab
and
animal setting.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
more the lab animal type setting.
Yeah.
And so it's really trying to take and so there's a lot of information that comes from those first two groups, and it's really trying to take that information and distill it in a way that is usable and applicable to our situation.
Right, right, right. Switching gears a little bit, one of the reasons why the NHP, the non-human primate, has become this model of choice for a lot of human disease is that translational aspect, right? Because I mean, mice have always been a rodent model, especially mouse models have been used for forever and ever, but there are a lot of limitations. The first thing that pops into my mind is CNS studies. I mean, like the mouse brain, human brain, very different, and the primate is a very, a good kind of, it's a very high translational potential. And so, and if, as I understand, primates are very highly, they're very cognitive, they're very intelligent animals, from my understanding. So I think, is there a does do these enrichment programs, do they really help enhance complex studies and, the translational value of complex studies. And what I'm trying to get at is you have limitations with mice in terms of, cognitive, what you can get them to do cognitively, whereas with primates, you can do a lot more. So how do these enrichment programs boost that even further?
Yeah. A lot of it comes down to just the animal's well-being and what they're, willing to do as well when it comes to getting them to training them to do things. And, if you're really, have an animal-centric welfare first mindset,
Mm.
the animals will be much more willing to participate in the training that you're doing. And then an effective training protocol on top of that, you can really start working on some elegant study design to start really analyzing the topic that you're researching. And a good example of that would be how non-human primates have been utilized in the neuroscience space, kind of how you
Mm.
mentioned. So
Hmm.
because with my PhD, we were studying motor systems research and
Okay.
precision submovements, and the primate is an amazing model for that, just because they are so similar to us uh, physiologically, that it really gives insight that no other species really can.
So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. When you say like really, so you were talking about fine motor skills, right? You're talking
Mhm.
about very small movements, not gross movements, but more like the fine. So can you give us like a example that you've either worked on or read about what we're talking about here? Is it something like really fine work? What does that mean?
Yeah, so a lot of my PhD work revolved around um, how the primary motor cortex generates initial and corrective submovements, and particularly when it comes to reaching. And so, if I'm reaching for something small, that large movement of reaching to get that thing is actually broken down into an initial and then several corrective submovements if necessary. Um,
Okay.
and you know what the primate brain does, very similar to ours, is they have areas for the hand. They have
Right.
their limbs are very are constructed similar to how ours are, and so we can
Okay.
get a good idea of the the neural representation in the motor cortex by looking at the
Right.
primate brain much more so than we would
Right.
see like with a rodent.
Right, right, right. And right as you were talking about motor stuff, I was thinking, gosh, like things like motor neuron disease or, losses. I mean, I don't know if Parkinson's is an application, but there is, you get like definitely have movement issues with Parkinson's. So this could be a really interesting way to look at those fine movements, not so much, and be able to see are there small changes in these kind of fine movements.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
And so sorry, not to interrupt, but
go ahead, go
to
ahead, go ahead.
continue on that, and to kind of bring it back home to your initial question is, a comprehensive and quality enrichment program is going to, your animals are going to be much more likely to participate voluntarily in that.
Yeah.
And, you should have much more reliable and accurate data.
Well, you shouldn't be forcing animals to do actions they're not comfortable with or they're not willing to do, right? Because wouldn't that skew the data, not to mention the welfare part of it? I mean, that's just obvious, but when they are willing to do it, then is that's probably the stress levels are lower, right? So it would be a little
Absolutely.
more cleaner data.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it seems to me, I mean, what I'm getting out of this, and I'll probably do a quick summary, is that it makes a ton of sense, not from a welfare point of view, that's absolutely clear, but and within the three R's, refinement. And I do believe that there is a reduction component, because if you can use smaller cohorts but are enriched and well trained, you're not going to have absolutely crazy changes in your data, which is statistically would be would be a challenge to analyze. But if you got tighter data sets with less variation, you could probably get away potentially with using smaller cohorts. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you are getting, quite a bit of variability in your data, I mean, that could be, the study itself telling you something, but, um, you need to do your best to control for those variables being introduced to your
Yes.
study. And,
Yes.
at the worst case scenario is, having to rerun a study for preventable
Yes.
reasons. And, not only does this go against the three R's, as you mentioned, and, ethical animal research practices in general, but it also has significant costs to the clients and their
Yes.
future patients. We work in, the
Yes.
biomedical field, like these are medications or
Yes.
devices or potential processes or medical
Yes.
procedures that are potentially going into patients. And,
Yes.
these mistakes can result in, inaccurate results, future study design flaws, test article
Yes.
reformulations, timeline delays, and proper animal training and behavioral management are major tools that we have to prevent having to pay these costs.
Yes, and I'll add one more point because the truth remains that animal sourcing continues to be a challenge. So when you do have a study, you do have the animals, you want to make sure that you get the best, cleanest, tightest data set because, as you said, rerunning studies, it's not just about cost. Sometimes, as timelines get blown out, and it's hard to source. Ethically source high quality animals and things like that. And especially if you're looking for certain ages or gender or what have you, it could really like upend an entire drug development timeline if you're not careful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And,
Right.
especially if, a client is looking to, submit for approval or if they are being fast
Mm,
tracked, like any kind of delay is, extremely detrimental to that.
right, right, right. No,
Not only financially, but to the patients as well.
right, right. And a lot of our, the folks who in the drug development space are biotechs, right? And their funding depends on getting to a milestone. It's like it's always a race against time, whether it's for money, whether it's for getting to the FDA, what have you. No, this has been wonderful. So I've learned a ton, and it really brings home the fact that I think people don't think about animal enrichment as much as they should, but there's so much. It's so important. It's what I find it like something that underpins the entire study. So I'm really really glad that you're with us at Biomere, and thank you so much for for educating us rather, enriching us on animal enrichment, educating us, and I think this is something that I think our listeners are going to find very very useful. So thank you so much, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Anjali. And, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the importance of behavioral management and, quality training of non-human primates in biomedical research. And it really is a privilege to work with these amazing animals
Yes.
and, participate in the research that they're helping advance.
I absolutely could not agree more. I mean, they are, yeah, they're so, we owe so much to these animals. I'm so
Yeah.
glad that, you and your team are care about these animals, make sure that they're living in a really good environment. So with that, I will say thank you. And to our listeners, I will say, if you're interested in learning more about Biomere services and what we do, please do email bd@biomere.com or check out our website, www.biomere.com. Thank you.